I'm a genius. I muted myself so that you wouldn't hear me watching TikTok videos of people making dice. But I am no longer muted. Here we go.
Woo! Hello, Apphia. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming to this session. You're either here because you love anime, you know someone who loves anime, or you have no idea what you're doing here, but welcome. So today our presentation is from Apphia Yu. She is a voice actor and director with Funimation. She has played Ryo Nakamura in Assassination Classroom, Young Amajiki in My Hero Academia, Marie Adley in Black Clover, Berta and Scylla in Food Wars, Honoka Sawada in Horimiya, Young Shiguri in Fruits Basket. And she has also directed such shows as The Disastrous Life of Saki Kei, The Quintessential Quintuplets, and Assassination Classroom. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you, if only digitally. Thank you for coming. So this panel, I assume, is going to be a little bit freeform. What I'm sure everyone knows the structure already, but I assume it involves, like, are we going up to the mic and doing Q&A type stuff? Is that how
We
this is
will
going to
be
work?
doing Q&A at the end of the session.
Got it. Okay. So this is the part where I talk about anime a lot. Cool. All right. Hi, my name's Apphia. You can call me Ayu, and I work in anime in a lot of different capacities. You've already heard the stuff listed there. I've also currently directing the series Dynazenon, which is the sequel to Gridman, if any of you have seen that on Toonami. And I have been working in localization and dubbing anime for about, math is hard, 13 years. 13 years. I started out working on stage and doing things like that, and wound up jumping into anime later. I know the program guide said it was sort of a deep dive into my voices, but I think one of the things that we can talk about, especially when Q&A comes up, is stuff in the industry. If you have any questions about getting into it yourself, since I do direct and cast and have done some voice coaching, if you have any questions about your own career, I'd be very happy to answer them. And I think what we're talking about right now in particular is dubbing anime and voice of work in general, sort of in the age of a pandemic where we are right now. It is surprisingly very hard to speak and voice a character through a mask without it coming out super muffled. So we had to come up with a lot of other tricks in order to get anime to come out and keep running. Just real quick, for show of hands, who here does watch dubs on a pretty regular basis? Like, cool. Yeah, it's okay to say no. And who is familiar with Funimation's Simuldub system? At all? Okay, cool. So what Funimation launched a couple years ago was, instead of waiting for a show to finish in Japan and then you dub all of it and then release it, what they started doing was dubbing episodes as soon as they came out. We would start dubbing them and releasing them one at a time as they were coming out. So the schedule for that changed a lot. Everyone had to be on call at all times. You had to be there within the week in order to make sure that everything was on schedule. So the minute the pandemic hit, obviously, we can't go into the office anymore. We can't be in there doing things like sharing the same microphone because we're breathing on the same thing. Even sharing headphones was all bad. So everyone had to stay home, and that really pumped the brakes on getting out episodes on a weekly basis. There are a lot of different solutions that many different companies came up with, but the first one that Funimation did, that a lot of other companies have also done, is they started sending out these things called actor kits, which is essentially just sort of a little setup where a mic that you can use and plug into and record, and a screen to see video and things like that, so that we would all record at home in our own spaces. They unfortunately they're very expensive, so they couldn't make one for every single actor in the whole world, which meant that actors who already had their own home setup, they had bought a booth, they had bought a microphone, they had all the software already done for them, were already in the pool. They could jump in immediately and start working with no friction whatsoever. And it's one of the things that I appreciate the actor kits, and was something that I really sort of argued for, because setting up a home booth can be very expensive. And if you did want to ask about hardware and things like that, you're welcome to. But essentially, the top tier industry microphone starts at $2,000. that is the cheapest you can find for the industry level quality that people expect. On top of that, in terms of like building a space so that your recording sounds good, you don't get any sound in from the outside anytime the lawnmower goes by or anything like that, can also run you a couple thousand more dollars. A lot of the software that people use is a subscription based service. So if you're not working very regularly, that doesn't help either. And so there was suddenly this huge divide between people who financially were able to have all these things, either already had them or could immediately go out and purchase them, and the people who couldn't. And the fact that Funimation was willing to put together these actor kits was a really good first step in terms of helping to balance it out, but it still made it really difficult for a lot of people who are not in the position to be able to buy their own hardware. As time went on and people started figuring these things out, people there's actually other software now that is less expensive or even free to use if you're the actor, as long as you're not the director or something like that. And so the playing field has leveled out a little bit more now. The barrier to entry is lower than it was at the start, but it still is pretty difficult. The system we have rigged up now involves everyone remoting into the same computer, and we all talk to each other through those spaces. And in those ways, like, it's a little better as long as you have like a good sounding room and a good enough mic. We have mix engineers who can really clean that up and make it sound better. And so it's easier now than it used to be, but there is still a lot of difficult stuff, and you'll find a lot of people who are still struggling to make their sound good, or who have to pay extra money for it, or things like that. And we're also finding that because people are going in remotely, even things like the quality of your internet speed matters. There was a job that I auditioned for, and they liked how I sounded, but when we did a test, my internet wasn't fast enough, and they said that the sound quality coming through wasn't what they were looking for. And so basically, I couldn't have the job unless I was willing to go into a studio and actually use it. And there are a handful of local studios now that are like, we clean it, we hit it with UV light, the engineer's in a different room, so you can come in and use those spaces. And again, it's another step up in terms of making sure that this work and this job is still accessible for people who can't afford it. But all of those things took months to put in place, because you got to rebuild stuff, you got to make sure that your ventilation's good, you got to install all your UV lights. And what if you're a studio that can't afford to do that? Um, and so it's been a process, and it still is a process. I think we're probably in the best place we can be at the moment in terms of all of that, but it is, for me at least, still very difficult to want to try to bring in new people. And if they don't have access to a studio, and if they can't afford their own equipment on the front end, it makes it very, very difficult to introduce new people in the industry right now. Yeah. So if anyone had any questions about pandemic recording either, we can discuss those. I think that was mostly what we talked about earlier. Were
Yes.
there any other points to hit?
No, all those points were really great. So, how about how you got started in the business? Let's get into that.
Oh boy. You know, it, it had my name on the thing and said we were going to talk about me, and I tried really hard to divert. um, okay, so my path is actually kind of a boring one. Everyone has a different way into the industry, and mine is probably the most straightforward and the one that you're going to hear if you ask anyone what's some advice on getting into the industry. I started out doing a lot of community theater and stage stuff because, you can just go and try out for those. I messed around with friends, and we would record our own little like audio dramas at home on our very cheap microphones. And then eventually I scraped together enough money to put together a demo reel, which is back in the day they would call it your demo tape, because you recorded it onto a cassette tape, put it in an envelope, and mailed it in. These days you can email someone an MP3. It's way better. But that, ooh, wow, I gave away my age a little bit with that one. But I put together a demo tape, eventually became a demo CD, and mailed it out to anybody who was interested. And not everyone wrote back. In fact, almost no one did. But eventually, Funimation did. And they said, hey, do you want to come in? We've got some walla. And walla is essentially the crowd noises. You'll see people talk about that all the time, which is they put several people in a booth, which is also something you can't do during a pandemic. Four people usually in a box together. We all surround the microphone and provide all the background noise. So if you're in a scene in a restaurant, obviously there are going to be people in the background chatting, and that's the four of us standing here going, "Oh wow, this food is so good. Oh, actually, it's very pricey. Is there anything on the menu you want?" And that's just us going for 2 minutes saying restaurant things. And so that's normally where you start out. That's where you start meeting other people who are coming in, meeting directors and getting to know them, and also a sort of a really good place to practice being able to improv, come up with ideas on the fly, and sort of have a safer environment for that sort of thing while also being able to be in front of a microphone. These days during the pandemic, in order to get these Walla sessions done, we have a couple different options. One is there are a lot of voice actor roommates who share an apartment or a house or something, and we can get them to record together. The other option is we have people do it one at a time, and then the mix engineer has to layer and stack all of them on top of each other. It is incredibly labor intensive to do it that way and significantly more expensive, but we care about the safety of everyone working on this. So that's kind of how we get through Walla today. After Walla, or even sometimes while you're doing Walla, you'll also start recording characters that are typically referred to as bits, which are essentially the guy on the street who goes, "Hi there." He has a real line. Sometimes he even has a name, but is generally not considered to be the first thing you're going to see on the cast list when the credits roll. If you get noticed enough, which, if you're doing a good job, more directors will wind up putting you on their audition sheets, and then auditions will come out and you can audition for those. That's what happened to me back in the day. You would go into the studio to audition, and even before the pandemic, I think a lot of companies started transitioning to email auditions where they would just send you the audition sides and you could record them in your own home setup and turn those in so that you wouldn't have to go into the studio. It's a shorter drive for most people and cheaper for the studio actually to handle as well. So that is one of the nice things about that, especially because if you're recording on your home microphone, back then at least, they knew that if you got cast, you'd still be coming in. So the barrier to entry was just that you had a microphone. It didn't have to be the $2,000 industry standard one. So yeah, got a lot of auditions. Eventually, the first role I ever got cast in was in Fairy Tale as a minor character named Loki. She is a member of the Fairy Tale Guild. If you've ever seen it, she's the one with the glasses and the purple hair who hangs out at the guild all the time. And it was a couple years for me before I actually got cast as her. At that point in time, my parents were actually really super pressuring me to sort of move back home and not try doing this anymore because it had been years of on again, off again work and really, really scraping by on the best days. And so I told them, okay, you're right. Let's make a deal. I just got cast in a show. I didn't tell them which one it was. And I said, why don't we wait until the show wraps? And then I'll go home. How's that? I did not tell them that Fairy Tale is several hundred episodes long. But it worked. It super worked to my advantage. Loki is not a character I've spent a lot of time with. I think total over the course of the series, she speaks for about 30 minutes. But the fact that she was there was enough to keep me there. It was enough to get me in the door, enough to sort of work on polishing my own acting, training with other people, and just giving me the time that it took to build up my resume and get more involved. So by the time Fairy Tale wrapped, I had already started directing, and I think my parents even forgot about the deal. So that's pretty good. So to summarize that in terms of like what people say is what you should be doing, you want to get as much acting experience as you can on the front end in smaller spaces like community theater or even writing and performing your own productions, your own audio dramas, just for yourself, reading books out loud if you can, anything like that. And then as you get enough built up, you can also start taking classes if you want, or finding, a coach or a teacher to do private lessons with. Eventually, you want to make a demo reel, which is that sample audio of what you sound like and how you can act. And then you start sending those out to people. And most casting directors and studios will have a website or something that with very specific instructions on how to get your demo reel to them. So yeah, I think there we go. That was a question.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks. Next question. How
Mhm.
is directing different than voice acting? Like, what's that process like?
So when you're voice acting, kind of the only thing you care about is the character that you're with. And obviously, you want to be paying attention to who else is in the room, how you're reacting to them, how you're setting it up so other actors can react to you, and the character journey. But in most spaces, a person is focused on their own story. They're not thinking too hard about everybody else, you know? And so you do have to be very focused on one thing. When you're a director, you have to be focused on all the things. You have to be focused on how the characters are going to sound together, if the story is progressing in the way it needs to, if everyone's character journey is moving at the rates that they need to and things like that, and how well everyone clicks together. So that's something that you have to worry about. There are also like sort of more minor things like just paying attention to consistency in terms of pronouncing names or places or things like that, because oftentimes people, I mean, we all pronounce words differently. I even pronounce words differently. I say aunt and aunt. And a director will be there to try to make sure that it's consistent across the board so that the show feels more cohesive.
Great. So let's get more into voice acting specifics.
Sure.
How do you create a voice for a character? How do you find inspiration for your characters?
Ooh, depends on what you're working on. In terms of anime, there's actually not a lot of wiggle room because you're basing your performance off of somebody else's. So you hear what the original Japanese actor did, and if you're smart, you're going to try to sound as much like them to give people as good of an experience as you can. And so, really, it's just about trying to translate um, what that would mean to an audience here. One of the things that's difficult localization wise is coming up with sound that is authentic but also true to the original. One of the things that stands out, for example, is that in Japan, most women tend to naturally speak with a little bit of a higher voice. So a teenager would sound like this most of the time, whereas I'm sure most of the people around here understand that teenage girls aren't always up here. In fact, this is closer to what a teenage girl would sound like. And so, if you want someone to authentically sound like a teenager and not 10, you have to find a space that sounds like that while also, respecting the fact that the original voice might have had a higher pitch and that held meaning for that actor's performance and needs to hold meaning for yours as well. Um, yeah, so for acting in anime, it's pretty much trying to find a space where you can translate and localize the voice that was originally already set.
Okay, and when you're directing, is there certain qualities you look for, or it just depends?
Well, every director's gonna be different, so don't take my word as the one true way to do it. But I care very much about spatial awareness. And it's a weird thing to say because I just said, as an actor, you don't care about anyone else other than your character. Uh, but when I did stage, the thing that would tank a performance faster than anything was feeling like the other actor who you're having a dialogue with wasn't actually listening to you when you said your lines. You can kind of sense when an actor is simply waiting for it to be their turn to say their line, and the energy is not good. It doesn't feel like a real performance. It doesn't feel like a real discussion. It doesn't feel like they're there. And I feel that very strongly sometimes in voice acting, even more so, because when you're in the booth, we only record one person at a time. Unless you're genuinely trying to think about the other person, it is so easy to simply wait for your turn to speak and say it with feeling and emotion, and it sounds so real, but it just doesn't sound like you're talking to the other person. And that can be an exceptionally difficult skill to have, especially because if you record first, nobody else is there. You're responding to blank sound, no air, no nothing. You have to respond to it, and yet you have to say it in such a way that when the other person finally is recorded and placed in the scene, it sounds like the two of you were together the whole time. And I think that's probably what's most important to me. Everything else can be cheated Everything else can be coached and taught, but an actor has to come in with the intent of being aware of the other people in the space with them. I think that's the most important thing for me personally.
Okay, great. Okay, so I have a difficult question for
Oh
you.
no, I don't like difficult questions.
What are your favorite anime voice actors that you have voiced?
Okay, wait. So favorite voice actors or like favorite characters I've voiced?
How about both?
Oh no. Wow, that is a difficult question. Well, my number one anime voice actor is Micah Solusad, voice of Soul in Soul Eater, Yuri Plasetsky and Yuri on Ice. I'm trying to think of all the other stuff. Best Jeanist in My Hero Academia. He is Yuno in Black Clover. He is absolutely my number one, my bias. I stan. Also, I'm married to him. So there is that. But I admire a lot of people in the business. I'm going to list the cast that I'm working with literally right now because they're at the forefront of my mind. But right now, while directing Dinah Zenon, I am having a very good time with Dallas Reed, with David Matranga, with Jason Liebrecht. I'm sure there are other people, and they're going to be very sad that I didn't mention the names, but I mean you too. Uh, but really, and that's kind of the thing that, your favorite book is always the one that you just read, is because they're at the forefront of my mind. I'm like, oh, they're so impressive. I love all of them. But really, I think any actor is someone that I could learn something from. And I love that there's such a wealth of knowledge out there and a lot of people who have gone places and done things and play roles that I haven't, because it means that there's still so much more for me to learn. And for the second part of your question, which was characters I've voiced that are my favorite, I do love Nakamura from Assassination Classroom, like, a lot. She's such a troublemaker, and I vibe with that. So, big fan of her. It's not as well known of a series, it's called Shonen Maid, and I voiced the main character in that, Shihiro, and he's a lot of fun because he gets to yell a lot. Excuse me. Almost sneezed, but didn't. I saved it. And so he's fun because he's very young, but he has this sense of like, I know what's right with the world, and being able to sort of just burn off all of that indignant energy was really fun, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. Thank you for asking the hard question.
You're welcome. Is it hard switching between like different ages and genders of characters?
Um, Not particularly. Everyone has a range, and I've always believed that there are different ways to measure your range. So you can have sort of the ages range, and of course, sort of a gender range. And I feel very fortunate that, especially on the gender range, I have a lot of leeway. But I think the most important range, and the one that is hardest for me, is the nuance of emotion. And the idea that anger is not always expressed in the same way. You could be the fiery angry who's always screaming and shouting, or you could be cold angry who just sort of emotionally shuts down and doesn't want to say anything anymore. And when you're acting, it's always easiest to jump into your version of that emotion. It's always easiest to express your form of anger or your form of sadness. And I think the hardest part is finding the character's form of sadness or how they would express joy versus how you necessarily would, and then still finding an authentic way to replicate that. So that's probably the hardest for me in terms of that, because there are so many different ways to express these emotions from so many different people. But in terms of like age and gender and stuff, I think a lot of like the more you practice, the easier it becomes. So it is very, very natural for me at this point.
Okay, thanks. Next question. What is something people underestimate about voice acting?
What do people underestimate about voice acting? Well, one, I think what I did touch on earlier is the idea that you're not with anybody in the room. Like, it's just you. And if you're lucky, you get to hear the recordings of some of the cast members who came before you, but you have to act like everyone is there with you. I have seen a lot of pushback when it comes to film and television, how so many times we're so high on the special effects that oftentimes a scene is filmed and it's just one actor in front of a green screen next to some guy holding a tennis ball on a stick. And those actors have very candidly expressed that it is hard to act against a tennis ball on a stick. And it is, and they have every right to express this. It is exceptionally difficult because part of acting is, well, you'll hear this all the time, acting is reacting. Part of it is being in that moment, finding the spaces where you can react to your fellow actors with the energy they bring. And when you voice act, you don't always get that. Specifically in dubbing, I will say. There are other spaces, especially in a lot of cartoons, where you do manage to get most, if not all, of the cast in the room, and then you do get to react off of each other, and it's fantastic. But especially in dubbing, and oftentimes in video games as well, you do not get that, and you just have to make it seem like it's happening.
Awesome. So, my next question is, how do you think acceptance of anime has grown since you started voice acting to now? Because you've been in the business for a bit.
Yeah, on the front end, and longtime anime fans will absolutely know this one. When you say you work in anime, everyone goes, "Oh, you mean the porn cartoons?" And thankfully now people know. Like on the front end, it was hard because then you have to explain it. I was dating a different person at the time, and their parents were like, that's from China, right? The Chinese cartoons." And I was like, "Ooh, okay, I can't have this conversation with you." Uh, and now, like, we're watching the Olympics. People are shouting out and referencing anime left and right, and it's amazing. And so I appreciate it. I know that growing up as a nerd, I felt very left out in a lot of ways because of the things that I cared about. And I know that there is a part of me that feels a little bit like, oh, well, now it's popular. Now that I'm grown up and people aren't going to stuff me in a locker for it, great, thanks. Where were you when I needed you? But there's also part of me that says, hey, better late than never. And also, I'm so glad that the next generation of kids who like this aren't going to have to worry about the things that I had to worry about. And so it's cool. I really like that it is accepted now. Even if people don't all understand it, they accept that it is, and that's pretty nice.
Yay, great. So, what advice would you well, you pretty much giving any advice, but what other advice would you have to any aspiring voice actor?
um, well, okay, I talked about that a little bit. If you are absolutely square one, the only thought that's ever entered your head is I want to, and you haven't once Googled how do I become a voice actor, I would start there. The two big resources that people are going to give you if you just show up and go, "Hi, I want to be a voice actor. What do you have to say?" is there's one website, I want to be a voice actor.com, and another one, voiceactingclub.com. And both of those are incredible resources. The first is, it's like the books that I had to spend lots of money on when I started out. It gives you all the information. It talks about the industry. It describes what needs to be in your demo reel. It's very, very good. The other one is a community, so you'll find other people there who range all over from just getting started to been pros in the business for years, talking and sharing tips and tricks, sharing auditions, talking about things like the hardware and stuff like that. And it's a really, really good place to sort of see who else is around, get embedded, make new friends, things like that. I would say after that, your most important thing is evaluating where you are and figuring out who or what can help you. There are a lot of classes available to people these days, and not all of them are a good fit for where you might be. So, evaluate what you are, evaluate what you want next in your career. Like, hey, I'm just trying to learn how to project better, or I don't shout well, in which case maybe you're actually looking for a singing coach. Or you feel like maybe you don't have the range that you want in terms of voices, like you only have the one. In that case, you might want an improv class that'll push you to do different things. Or if you're simply just like, listen, I feel like I'm a pretty good actor, but I don't even know how far away I'm supposed to stand from the mic, then you are looking for a technical class that will give you booth experience and have someone who can teach you with an engineer who says, well, you want to be this far away and you want to face in this direction, and here's what happens when you have to do something like this. And so be very thoughtful about where you spend your money on classes, because not every class is exactly what you need next. And also, a bit of advice for how to ask advice. The best thing to do is open up with where you are and what you've accomplished so far, and then ask for advice on next steps. So, for instance, you could say, "Hey, I have done exactly one community theater play. And I am starting to take singing lessons. What do you think comes next?" You could say, "Hey, I've done 50 community theater plays. I already have a demo reel. What do you think comes next?" You could say, "Hey, I've done no plays whatsoever. I keep auditioning and I'm not getting cast. What comes next?" And giving someone the structure of that, I think, also is the best way to ask for advice, because then they can give you much more focused advice other than, visit the website and maybe what you want is there.
Great, thanks. So I would actually like to move away from anime just for a quick second and ask you about voice acting in video games, particularly A Hat in Time.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. I voiced Hat Kid in A Hat in Time. It's a fun game. You should check it out. Okay, so earlier I did mention that when you are voicing an anime character, there's not a lot of space to create a voice, because I mean, you're bouncing it off of someone else's performance. In the case of A Hat in Time, there was a lot of space because she's an original character, and part of the audition process was designing the character voice, coming up with what you thought they would sound like and things like that. When I first got the audition, I saw, oh, she's very cute, she's very young, so we want something really youthful. They were also sort of pushing in terms of the look for it to be a little bit, have a retro nostalgia feel to it and a bit of a throwback. So I started thinking about games at the time that had more of that nostalgia feel to it. And I wound up actually pulling a lot of the feel and the vibe for my audition from the Link voice in Wind Waker. And all the little noises that he makes as he runs around. And I was like, they're very cute, and this game has strong nostalgia value to it, so I'll base it off of that. And because Hat Kid has a very sort of like, she's got a tomboy vibe to her, I decided to keep her voice also really sort of boyish all the way through. So even though it's super cute and super young and she's clearly a girl, I also wanted to have a little bit of a, oh, all right, it could be anything. And I was really proud of it when I submitted my audition, and I guess they liked it. So that's sort of how that came about. And I am just super delighted to see that Hat Kid and Hat in Time are still going strong all these years later.
All right, do you have any final thoughts before we get to audience questions?
Ooh, final thoughts. I don't know. Um, oof. Check out a book before you go. Am I allowed to say that?
Yes.
Check out a book before you go. You can ask me for recommendations too.
Yes, do you have any recommendations for anime or manga?
Ooh, anime and manga. Well, I mean, I'm not sure what you got, but I do love me some Delicious in Dungeon. I love Noragami. It is so good. It is so, so good. I'll never say no to that one. I really enjoyed All You Need Is Kill, which is kind of an obscure title, but if any of you saw many, many years ago that Tom Cruise movie, Edge of Tomorrow, Live, Die, Repeat, it is actually based on that. And so I was like, I'm curious. So I checked out the manga. I was like, oh, it's very good. Very cool. In case anyone's wondering, I'm literally just looking at my manga shelf and seeing what's on it because I don't remember anything. Let's see. Death Note's cool. What else am I looking at? Food Wars is fun. Wolf Children's pretty good. What else do I have? Hoodie Mio is nice. Ooh, Bride Story. Yeah, Bride Story. That was a good one. Case Closed. Big fan. Yeah, that's all I can read from here. The rest of them are hidden behind Transformers.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
So it is. This is
Okay.
Q&A time? Is that what-
Yes, Q&A
Cool.
time.
Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, y'all come on up.
Don't be shy.
I mean, I could just sit here and try to read off more titles, but Galvatron's in the way.
Hi, I have a question.
Oh, hello.
Hi. Do you have any advice for a young teenager who enjoys writing anime and adding on to characters, how to get into that?
In terms of like, are you talking about writing dub scripts or writing your own light novels and publishing original content?
Like piggybacking on existing anime stories like My Hero Academia and writing her own characters and adding them into her own story scripts with the existing characters.
All right. There is not a lot of room, if I'm being honest, to make money off of that. However, if it is something that you're interested in, I would recommend eventually setting out and writing your own content. And you could even try setting it in a world very similar if you don't feel comfortable sort of like building a world from the ground up or anything like that. But if it's something you want to pursue professionally, for legal reasons, it's very difficult to get involved in that space. I could. I don't want to say for legal reasons to make it seem like a lawyer is going to come after you for fanfic. What I mean is that oftentimes when people come up with their original stories for an existing work, there is a danger if the creator sees it of there being an argument over who may have come up with it in the first place. And because of that, you know, like if someone says, oh, I had a very cool idea for this show, and then it actually happens without their knowledge or they didn't actually contribute, there might be a legal space for someone to say, hey, I came up with this, not you, the creator. And so because of that, most people who create stuff try really hard not to look at any of it on purpose because they don't want to get in that kind of trouble, which is the reason that it makes it really difficult to get involved in that way. I think if you do want to get involved in projects, it is fine to write a lot of this content, to share it, to post it. There are so many examples of people who are fans who've written fan content who eventually started working on these original projects. So it would be a good thing. But the fastest way to get noticed, if you are confident enough to do it, and I would never push anyone to if they don't want to, if it doesn't make you happy, don't do it, is to eventually start writing your own original stuff. Yeah, like I have a friend of mine who's a published author, and they did eventually get to contribute to anthologies for a lot of really big name franchises, but they got noticed in the first place because they had been writing their own content. So it's not, I know it's not great advice, unfortunately, but
No, it's good. It's for my daughter. She's 12 and she does this. And so I just wanted to kind of help give her some insight as to how she could start progressing, you know, at a young age. You know, so thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I think if it makes you happy to write this content, go for it. Keep doing it. But the better way to get noticed would be with some original stuff.
Yay, next person.
Hello.
Is there any difference between voice acting for a series or a movie?
Difference between voice acting for a series or a movie. The work is fairly similar. Movies tend to have tighter deadlines, so you're gonna have to be there a lot sooner. But other than that, they're pretty similar, at least when it comes to anime dubbing. I know it is very different, and union rates and stuff are way different if we're talking about like something on Cartoon Network versus a Pixar film that hits theaters. But in terms of anime, they're very similar.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Yay, next person.
Hello.
How are you? Have you ever aged out of a voice or like had a voice that you can't hit the same way now that you did, say, 10 years ago?
I have not, and part of that is, and a lot of actors will tell you, that it's as long as you're maintaining it as you grow older, you'll still be able to reach it. It will be harder, but much like working out, because your voice, you know, it is a muscle. If you're working it out every day, if you're maintaining it, if you're staying flexible, so to speak, you can maintain it. I think the only time I've heard of it actually genuinely being a problem is if a voice actor, like a male voice actor, starts before he hits puberty. and then genuinely has like a voice drop afterwards. But other than that, even male voice actors I know who voiced teenage boys decades ago can still do it now as long as they maintain and keep stretching that part of their range.
Great answer.
Thank you.
We have another
Thank you for the
person.
question.
Welcome.
With the confused son that just talked to you. He is got multiple scripts on a voice recorder.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to do a series,
Mm-hmm.
and he does the different voices.
Mm-hmm.
But he's taking characters like from My Hero Academia, Minecraft. He's trying to like combine them.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody else ever done that, or is it just a him thing? Or
I think it is very common. I think, well, when I first started practicing, because I was too afraid to take classes because I didn't want anyone else to see me as a beginner, I would just sit in my closet so even my parents couldn't hear me and pull out my favorite manga and just read it out loud to myself. And then eventually I'd started turning it into more. I was deeply involved in other, all sorts of fan productions and things like that. It's how I got started in writing as well, honestly. Which is why I say the fastest way to get noticed is when you do original content. I think it is very natural to find things that you love and want to build on them. And I think that that sort of thing is a great place to start because it is a lot to ask of someone when they're starting out, especially to suddenly be able to write a whole world and characters and storylines just from their head out of nowhere. You don't start that way. You start with reimagining and bouncing off of other people's stuff over the things that sparked your excitement that mean a lot to you, and then you just find more ways to express that love and that content. That being said, as much as I would encourage anyone to pursue stuff like this, when you do eventually go pro, stuff like your demo reel needs to have original content on it. Sometimes people even hire a script writer. It is typically not great if you lift lines from existing content for your demo reel, if that is a thing that you want to do in the future. It is
Yeah, like
typically,
he done put his character, like he's special needs and got medical issues.
Mhm.
He done put a character of himself
Mhm.
in his scripts.
Yeah, I think
Make
that's
it look
fantastic.
so
Mhm.
yeah.
It's
It's just hard for
Mhm.
him to figure out because like we go out to parks, we go out places, and he does like the animation part of it, and then I put it through the film editing thing, and so we're trying to figure out how to do.
It
But-
sounds like fun, man. I wish my parents
Yeah.
let me do that.
That's great.
I feel like, especially with stuff like anime, these worlds are so beautiful and important in some of these shows that it makes sense to want to see ourselves reflected in them. It's so easy to imagine that you could be friends with a certain character or something like that. And to be able to express and write that, I think is really good.
Okay. And last question.
Mhm.
Is it common for a teenager to use the different characters from like My Hero Academia,
Mhm.
Minecraft, and other anime to put them as his friends? He
I
thinks
think
as
that it
them as his
happens.
friends.
I think that in a lot of spaces, these characters represent something so powerful that it's hard not to think of them as friends. One of the best things I've heard about anime is that oftentimes it can be there for you when things are very difficult, and it can inspire you in ways that you didn't expect to be inspired. And so I think that seeing them as a friend or someone that you care about is kind of the natural reaction to seeing a show or a story that touches your heart. I think that's one of the best things about it, that you can touch people with these stories and with these characters.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. First, I just want to say thank you for coming out here, for joining.
Thank you. I owe you an actual visit one day. I promise.
I had a few questions. One is, so you touched briefly on the Funny's Simuldub system. So how? So I know that like for some shows, they're still in production.
Mhm.
As episodes are coming out, how no pun intended, crunchy does that sometimes get time-wise for y'all?
Ooh, okay. You've asked a very good question, and I'm
And
going to
and
have
how
to
do y'all deal with
select my
that?
words carefully. I'm going to speak in some very broad terms here and say that the more time a project has, up until a point, and then you're just faffing about, but up until that point, if you have more time to complete a project, I think the people working on it feel better about it. Again, I'm speaking in very broad terms. Let's see. But I also think that if the audience is happy, and if you're not hurting yourself in the process, and that's a really big if, unfortunately, then go for it. Whew. Thank you. It's a very good question. It is the correct question to be asking. I'm afraid I can't get any more detail than that.
Another question that I had was
Mhm.
sort of, eh, I know this, I've heard that this very subjective. In your experience, did shows generally tend to have you record the lines first and then animate around, or are you speaking lines around the already animated show?
We typically record after the animation, so we have that as a reference in order to make it fit all the animation and match them, like the mouth opening and closing and stuff.
Okay, and just as kind of a last question, what are just some of the roles that you have had the most fun with?
The most fun with. Well, there was a character in a show called, oh goodness, Kimono Michi, who's a very small dragon girl with a very large appetite. And every scene she shows up in, she has a different food in her mouth. And so it was really fun to sort of feel like, oh, every single line is just, I'm really hungry. And anytime she drops one food, she's like, that looks good too. It takes place sort of in this fantasy world, and they go monster hunting all the time. And so they would go monster hunting, and as they bring it back, she's like, that? Can I eat that too? No, yes, I'm eating that now. I want to know. I have to know. And I loved her. She was so much fun to play with, and to just because she's very one track mind, but also it keeps getting more ridiculous each time. It was very funny, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you for being here.
Hello, I just want to say first, thank you for the presentation to you in the library. This has been very informative. I have two questions, one silly and one is a little more technical.
Uh-oh, okay.
The first is, have you ever, I guess, mistakenly or unconsciously used a voice outside of, voice acting instead of your normal voice?
Well, my friends tell me I have a drive-through voice where every time I go like to a fast food place and order out of the drive-through, my voice like just pitches up until I sound like I'm 10. I've never noticed it, but they all swear it's true, so I believe it. I believe them, and I never try. For some reason, anytime I'm ordering a burger and fries, it's like, "Hi, burger and fries." I don't know why. It just happens. And what was the other question? I'm sorry.
The other one is, what does practice actually look like? What does it entail? And do you have a background in linguistics? It seems very connected.
Dang, they are pretty connected. I don't technically have a background in it other than like as a hobby. I do spend a lot of time studying other languages, pronunciation, things like that, for my own personal benefit, but I've never been formally trained. Practice looks like a lot of things, but mostly it is about just learning what you sound like. One of the best ways to practice if you feel like you're not really ready to go out anywhere yet is to just grab your favorite book, turn on whatever recording software you've got, and just read it out loud. Act as if you're recording an audiobook and read it out loud. And then, the important part, listen to it. And it's gonna be hard the first time. It's gonna be hard for a lot of the time because you're going to be surprised at how you sound. You're going to be surprised at all the places where you take breaths, or where you don't, or where your breath sounds short, or even the voices that you thought you were doing and how they didn't quite come out the way you wanted them to. And listening back and deciding what you like about it and what you don't, and trying again, rereading it until it gets closer to what you want, is very important. If you take singing lessons, and I think some acting lessons too, they'll teach you a lot of the basic like exercises, like, oh, a warm-up, huh? warm-up stuff. And that's easy, and you should be doing that too in order to keep your voice flexible. But to practice as an actor means to keep listening back to what you've been doing and deciding, what did I like about it? Did this hold meaning? Did it not? Did it sound like I was in the room talking with someone else? Did it not? And oftentimes it's a good idea to compare to other actors who you really respect and ask yourself, well, what did they do about this that I liked? What in this scene made me cry or made me laugh? And how did they get me to do that? What about the read brought that too? And try to incorporate that into your own spaces.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Another person. Go ahead.
Hello.
What age would you recommend starting at? Obviously I'm not like old enough to get a job yet, but I do want to know when I should like start looking.
All right. Well, in terms of when to start actually just doing your at-home practices in your closet like me, anytime. If it makes you happy to do it, just start doing that. You can just start recording yourself. Obviously, because of legal reasons, you can't really go out for like work, especially online, until 18. But before then, especially if you have your parents' permission, you can start trying out for, you know, either local things like community theater, stuff like that, or even just writing and recording your own stuff for yourself to have it. All of those things are stuff that you can start doing immediately. And if it's something that you're interested in, I would recommend it. If you're looking for other spaces, especially to have other friends to bounce off of, yeah, you could do this online. I was gonna say you shouldn't be getting together too often right now, but you can actually do like play a lot of D&D with your friends, because that's a lot of role playing and improv practice right there. But I would say if you really want to get into this, and if you're feeling confident, it might be okay to get a coach probably at 16 or 17. And then really start sending out your demos and auditioning for projects after that. I know a lot of people start sooner, and if that's a discussion you and your parents or whatever want to have, go for it, but that is what I can recommend.
Thank you.
All right, we have time for one more question, and that's it.
Ooh, all right, I'll talk fast.
Hi, I just have a quick question. I'm an animator. I have OCs and I write my own original stories, and I'm just wondering how I go about writing a description for a voice for a character if I want to commission a voice actor.
Ooh, very cool. So there are a lot of ways people do this. One of the most common is simply to link to a video of a voice that you like and say, kind of like this. But things that voice actors like to see include things like pitch, you know, high, medium, low. Texture, is their voice clear? Is it rough? Is it somewhere in between? Do they have an accent? If so, what? Age always helps. And then a handful of markers in terms of your character's personality. So are they spunky? Are they morose? Are they, you know, easily aggravated? Are they incredibly chill? And a few of those markers will really help someone pick what voice they want, and in terms of like where to place it. But I think the fastest shortcut that I see a lot of professional auditions use is just, these are some voices we already like, or a character type we already like. So you can set it here, and then on top of that, just add stuff like their age, their personality, and then a little bit of texture notes.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yay! Thank
Yay,
you
we
so
did
much,
it.
Apphia, for joining us.
Thank
This was
you
wonderful.
all for asking such lovely questions. This was fantastic. Everyone check out a book before you go. I'm going to say it again. Get a book. Everybody read, especially if you want to be a voice actor. The part of your brain that imagines things while you're reading is actually similar to the part that exercises when you become an actor. So even if you're reading to yourself instead of out loud, you're still practicing, but you should do it out loud.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody take care.
Bye.